especially for us in libraries, is that we should be having some fun while we're doing it. Of course, there are no grades. There is nothing that I'm giving you in terms of the follow-alongs for today or the exercises afterwards. They're just literally for you to do, to have some practice time in a way that's a little bit more guided and maybe gives you an idea of some things to try. There are no wrong or right answers for the things we're doing today. And we'll talk more about wrong or right answers with AI in just a few minutes, but you're going to have lots of resources to explore and investigate as we go along as well. The other thing I want to point out is that all of the images here, and I have this on my slide, but just to kind of point out, all the images are created by artificial intelligence, except for the ones that I am noting otherwise. This is indeed an artificial intelligence created image. Now, some of you may remember the early images and how terrible they were of people. It is getting better all the time. And so we'll talk more about that as we go along. And we're going to talk a little bit about creating images. Now, this one is a selfie that I took of myself. So that one is not artificial intelligence. And I am not a robot or AI. This is artificial intelligence. So it really is getting better, all the time as we start to use it. And we're going to talk more about how to make it better. What we're not covering today, I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork of what we're talking about, because we are going to be focused on the productivity side and really how we can use it in some of the things we do on a daily basis or task where we may have a lot of tasks to do related to a particular event that's coming up. But we're not really going to touch on things like we'll talk a little bit about quality of artificial intelligence and things like that, and evaluating artificial intelligence as we go along. But there won't be a lot of that in today's session. There are many resources in the handout. There's a whole section on AI quality, and there's lots of readings there about the quality of the content that AI is creating, as well as some of the ways to identify AI. And I have a little separate handout. It's not very long. There's a little separate handout of things to look for when you are evaluating AI created content. There are many different tools for AI. If you're creating images, there's a whole long list, and I hate to keep hate to keep hyping my resource list. It is freely available, so it is part of what we're talking about today. But there are so many more tools than I can possibly talk about today. So we're really going to focus on what I call the biggies: Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, and then because you do have access to Canva, I'm going to talk a little bit about Canva too and its AI capability. Because if you've been using Canva for a while, they kind of keep rolling stuff out in terms of artificial intelligence, and you may not have noticed it, or you may just, you're kind of doing what you're doing and it's working, but there's a better way to do some of this. So I do want to talk just a tiny little bit about Canva as we go along. So the other piece of it is we're going to touch some on the challenges of AI, and you'll get more of a sense of that. I'm sure you're already hearing and reading things in the media about, AI hallucinations and AI making up information and things like that. There's certainly plenty of that. There is a lot of content in the resources guide already about all the different pieces of that. AI is just a tool. It can be used in whatever way. Think about how useful a hammer is, right? I mean, if we have a hammer, we can fix so many things. We could use it in some cases to fix a car, or use it to fix a house, or use it to fix a, step on our staircase, or it can be used as a paperweight, or it can be used as a lot of things, or it can be used to harm someone or to do serious damage to someone, correct? So it is just a tool. Artificial intelligence is just a tool. It can be used for good and it can be used for bad. And of course, we want to focus on the good of artificial intelligence, but we do need to be aware that there is, just like any tool that we have available to us, there is that potential for misuse. And so I do think that's one of the areas that will be, as librarians and information professionals, we're going to be talking about more as we continue down this path of artificial intelligence, because we are going to be having more patrons coming in who are using artificial intelligence, who are engaging with it. They may or may not realize they're engaging with artificial intelligence, but they are indeed using those products. And so we may, we will definitely need to be helping them understand artificial intelligence a little bit more, especially if they come in and they're asking for things that we don't have, or the information they have is so clearly misinformation. And the source of that may be coming from artificial intelligence. And in some cases, it's not the artificial intelligence application's fault if you do not ask it the right information, or you do not ask it in a way that it will understand, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes too, then it's going to struggle to give you a right answer. It may give you an answer that it sees is appropriate for the question that you've asked, but is not actually going to, be truthful in that way in terms of the kind of information seeking that you may have. I came up with this last year and I've kind of tweaked it a little bit. I'm not going to go into all of the timeline points or anything like that. I kind of want to just hit the big buckets. But artificial intelligence has really been around from, say, the mid 1950s. I think somewhere around 1955, 1956 was the beginning of thinking about artificial intelligence. So it has been in development for a long time. And part of what's driven it, of course, is the increase in computational power of our computers. I mean, the fact that we're all walking around, or many of us are walking around with these little computers in our hands, and we're able to send emails and take photos, and now they have artificial intelligence built into them. I mean, there's just so much we can do with these little computers we walk around with in our hands, that everything just has so much more computational power so that it can do these complex processes. And that's something we're starting to talk more about with artificial intelligence as well, is how much resources it takes to actually run and process these kind of computations and to create this kind of content. So we do have a lot more that we're going to be figuring out as we go along with artificial intelligence. And I don't want to ignore that completely. I want to just acknowledge it and kind of address that it's not the focus of today's session. But we do need to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about. One of the things I see as a confusion is how intelligent artificial intelligence is. And in 2022, there was a Google engineer, and his life has not gone so well because he ended up losing his job and all kinds of stuff, unfortunately. But he made this big announcement on, I think it was still Twitter at that point. He made this big announcement about their artificial intelligence being sentient, meaning that it could actually think for itself. Google then had to step in and say, no, 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 that's not true. We're not to that point. And there was a sort of a little bit of a hubbub and a little bit of a, I wouldn't say it was a controversy, but it was like this announcement was made, and the scientists who have been working on artificial intelligence kind of pushed back, and Google pushed back, and then they sort of retracted their statement. And so it was either a premature statement, or it was potentially something that was being discussed that was more research oriented and really not available to the public, and maybe even not meant to be available to the public. So the intelligent aspect of it is still questionable. And the reason why I think that's important for us to realize is because it does not have the ability to, say, be empathetic. It can approximate that. So for example, if you tell artificial intelligence, I'm having a very bad day, what do you suggest to, what should I do to make myself feel better? It's going to go out and look at a bunch of resources and see what it can come up with in terms of ideas to help you feel better. It's not actually understanding. It has no feeling. So it doesn't understand that you're what having a bad day really means. It just goes to look at information to see what people who are having a bad day say that they would do to feel better. And hopefully there are enough guardrails created around that particular product that you're using, that it would not give you some suggestions that would be harmful. But that sort of stuff has happened with some of the early artificial intelligence projects where there really weren't guardrails put around it. So it is a tool, and it is something that is very, very powerful. It can do a lot for us, and we'll be exploring some of those things it can do for us in just a few minutes. But the other piece of it is that it just really doesn't have the ability to understand. So the more clear you can be with it, the more you can clearly state exactly what you need from it, the more likely you're going to get a result that's going to match your needs or be a good result. So clarity when you're talking to or typing to artificial intelligence is very, very important. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we start really digging into the artificial intelligence piece of it. There are multiple types of artificial intelligence out there. There's generative, what's called generative AI, and this is primarily what most of us are engaging with now. This would be ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, some of the tools built into Facebook, like when it asks you if you want to have a summary, or it gives you a summary, or sometimes now if you have the AI piece of it turned on, or if you haven't turned off the AI piece in Facebook, it will say, users say this, and Amazon is doing this too. Like the general consensus among comments and reviews is that this is a good product and most people think it works well, or something like that. Those summaries are typically generated by artificial intelligence. So what generative AI is doing is it's synthesizing a bunch of information, and it is then giving us some kind of results. It really works fairly well with text, and especially when summarizing or being able to go out and look at content and to be able to give us some information, or if we give it some content, it can do some analysis of that and maybe review it and polish it up or whatever we may want of it. But what it doesn't do a good job of, these generative AI projects, is they don't really do a good job of working with data. Now, there are some projects that will work with Excel and work with OpenRefine and work with spreadsheets and work with the back ends of systems. There are coding specific AI projects out there for doing like websites and stuff like that. So there are very specific tools out there to work with, sort of very specific areas. So primarily what we're dealing with is what's generative. It is to generate content. So it is to create content, either from content that's been given, or that could be revising content, updating content, things like that. Depending upon the AI that you're using, that can be text. They all do text as far as the generative AI. Can be images, video, audio, and or data. Now, the data piece is the caveat because it just is not built for data, but you can ask it to do some things with data. So let's say you have an Excel spreadsheet and you're wondering if you have duplicates on that spreadsheet. That's something it could probably do. Like ChatGPT could do that. Copilot could do that. I haven't tried it in Gemini, but I'm sure it could do that too. Are there other tools that you can use in Excel to tell you if you have duplicates in your spreadsheet? Yes. And so this gets to the notion of which tool is the best for the job that you want to do. So, just put AI in your toolbox with all the other things you know how to do, and that'll just be one of the tools that you'll use. And you may use it more, or you may use it a lot for some things. Like I use it a lot to write promotional stuff because I'm just terrible at that. And that may be something that you do. I need to draft a letter to send to the board of directors, and that's just something I have a really hard time doing. That may be something that ChatGPT or Copilot can help you with. The other types of AI or translation services, and we already see these in action. So if you ask Google Translate to translate something for you, I mean, its name kind of gives it away what it does, right? But any of those translation services or some of these language learning services that use your own voice to kind of, provide correction and things like that, a lot of those are starting to have artificial intelligence behind them. Classification and clustering, this isn't necessarily like a library thing, but it's more like the organization and grouping of information. You see this more kind of used in the science world, but I could definitely see, and we'll talk a little bit about classification and clustering as we're kind of looking at some of the things that artificial intelligence can kind of do in our work. But there are big projects to like organize. For example, in Google, if you use Google Photos, you can have it organize just all your photos in all different kinds of categories, and it'll even try to identify people and to organize those in categories for you. So that functionality to be able to organize things at a really high level and to kind of cluster or group things together at a high level, that's typically using a different kind of artificial intelligence than this generative AI that we use. And then there's information extraction, which is pretty much just what it says. It's just a higher level information kind of service. Speech to text, a lot of us are familiar using speech to text and text to speech. They're starting to use a lot more artificial intelligence now. And then there's a lot more happening in the area of image recognition and image analysis. Of course, when we start talking about analyzing photos that include people, then we start getting into some squishy issues. But, you know, the software being able to do that, say if you scan a whole bunch of photos from a community history project, maybe you've partnered with an organization and they have just thousands of photographs and you're going to help them scan that, it would be fantastic if you could have some data to go along with it, right? Because the data is what's going to make those scan things findable. So some of these products can really help with that process, but it is tricky because images are really tricky to work with in terms of that. I'm not going to go through, there's things on my slides I will kind of touch on, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I like to give people more information on slides rather than less, because I just I just hate it when I go to a presentation and I have slides that are just kind of fluff. So I want real things. The most important part about this is AI is very quick, so it will be very, very quick. It does not question itself. Now, some of the tools will ask you, did I give you the right answer? Or does this meet your needs? Or I hope you like this. So it will give you sort of it might seem a little indecisive, but the thing is, it's given you an answer. So that is a decisive response. Whether or not it's asking you for feedback is to try to help build in that piece of the workflow. It is adaptive. So you can ask it to revise what it's just done or provide it with more feedback, and it will make changes. And just like some of the tools that are being rolled out kind of really everywhere with like predictive typing and things like that, the more you use it, the more it will recognize the words you choose or your style of speaking, and it will try to adapt to that as well. So there is some analysis that artificial intelligence products do for us in addition to, you know, whatever work we have. They are analyzing how we interact with them as well. The part of this that I had to just mark out is that it's independent. And I just don't think at this point in time that artificial intelligence is truly independent. We need to be watching it. We need to make sure we're getting the results we want. And this is very important to us as library professionals, and really anybody who works in an educational institution or a library or museum. We are credible, valid, trusted sources of information, or we have been for many, many years, and we are fighting to keep that, right? We are fighting to maintain the view that we are, and the truth that we are credible sources of information. And so we do want to make sure that when we're using artificial intelligence, we aren't contributing to misinformation or disinformation out there. And the way to do that is to check it, to just make sure that, you know, the information's correct. Now you may say, well, gosh, that sounds like a lot of work. Why wouldn't I just do that myself? Well, let's say I'm doing well, for example, I was doing a presentation where I was talking about the impact of natural disasters and how to recover from natural disasters in the library, and specifically hurricanes, but we were talking kind of natural disasters as a whole. And one of my areas that I was covering was water damage, and how do you deal with water damage after a natural disaster in a library, and how do you deal with cleaning up the materials, and how do you evaluate those materials. All those things I already know. It was just more about pulling together the sources. And so I went to my tried and true sources, National Archives, Library of Congress, all the different places, pulled together all the different resources, put together all my stuff. And then I started thinking about, like, well, I know water, there's water that comes like out of a sprinkler that may be more clean water. There would be water that, would come from a river, or the roof falls in and the water damage comes that way. And it just made me think, like, oh, there's probably different ways that we kind of look at water. And so then, of course, I asked artificial intelligence, what are the different levels of water in terms of natural disasters? And it actually gave me a link to a ranked list and talked about everything from what we would consider not drinkable water, but cleanish water. It's water where you could dry the books out, dry the materials out, and things are going to be okay, mostly. I mean, you may have some other issues, but the water itself, damage can be mitigated. And then you have all the way to the end where you have water that is just absolutely toxic because of the chemicals that it's come in contact with and all kinds of things that happens to water in natural disasters. And the fact that there was this rating system, I was like, wow, I never, like, as much as I've worked in libraries, I never knew that there was this 4 levels of water in terms of how toxic water can be. And so I was like, wow, this is a great thing to include. I don't think we've ever talked about this when we talk about disaster recovery efforts and things like that. And that's something that I wouldn't have probably discovered if I hadn't asked artificial intelligence, because it's not something that we really go into that deep when we're talking about kind of recovering from a disaster. Yeah, we know that we should wear protective gear when we're dealing with materials that have been part of a natural disaster and all that kind of stuff, but not really that level of information. So one of the things that's really useful about artificial intelligence is that it can alert you to areas where you may want to explore further. And it can also provide you with some resources that you either didn't know about, or maybe had, maybe you hadn't on your list, but you had not found that area of that particular website yet that it was able to pull out. So I think that is one of the things that can really help in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of looking at it from the productivity angle. I mean, yes, do we all know how to do research? We do. And if we had all the time in the world to do research, that I would have gotten there, right? But if you only have a few weeks, or maybe you only have a day to do research, or maybe you have just a couple of hours to do research before you're heading to a meeting, or before you're going to talk about an issue with a particular group of your community members, then artificial intelligence can give you some key talking points. It can give you some issues to think about and to explore further. So it can really cut down, or help cut down, on that research time. And for those of you, I don't know if there's any in this group who kind of are like, I don't know about artificial intelligence so much. We are already using it. So if you have booked any kind of travel in the last year, if you have used any kind of search engine, Google already has it in there. It's already given answers. Bing has it, Edge has it. A lot of the products we're starting to interact with already have artificial intelligence baked into it. So we're interacting with it even if we're not seeing it. If you have a smart speaker and you are asking it for any questions, if you have mapping, any kind of map or travel app on your phone or in your car, if your car can self-park itself, all those wonderful things cars can do these days, any of those things are likely using some artificial intelligence in it already. So I think that's part of it too, even though it seemed like it was a big kind of news, like, oh my gosh, artificial intelligence came out. That chart shows that it's been taking a long time for us to get here. And not only is it taken a long time for us to get here, we have been sort of exposed to artificial intelligence for a while, even if we didn't really understand that that's what we're using. So just a few things. Not all AI is the same. Hopefully you've got a little bit of sense of that from your own experiences already. Right tool for the right project and task. I do love AI. I think it can help us in so many ways, but there are other tools out there that I love equally well. You know, it's hard to beat a good spreadsheet sometimes. So, use the tool that is the right tool for the right task. Now, you may want to experiment if you have always kind of, you're doing a social media post and you write your social media post, or maybe you started as a blog post or news release, and then you kind of changed it for all the audiences, and you've done that sort of manually as a Word document. Certainly, you do not need to abandon that just immediately, but you can try using that with artificial intelligence a few times and then see what you think. And you may need to try other tools. If you try Gemini and you feel like what you're getting from Gemini is not very helpful, then try Copilot. If you find that what you're getting from Copilot isn't helpful, then maybe try ChatGPT. And then also the other piece of it, it does require some content and some content and training. We're going to talk a little more about training in just a second, but it does require some content. So I know before I've used it to write a bio for me. And we'll see an example of that in just a minute. But if you don't have a lot of information about yourself that's publicly available, then it's probably going to have a hard time writing a bio for you. Let's say you needed to write a little biography because you're going to a conference or you're doing a presentation, or maybe you're putting something on the website. It's going to have a hard time finding information about you from the web. So it may be that you need to write something initially and then give that to the artificial intelligence to look at. It does assume that it is correct unless we tell it otherwise. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, because that's kind of how this misinformation stuff is happening. Let's see. It doesn't know what it's not taught, and we can't really dive into copyright and privacy and all that kind of stuff, but it just doesn't have the same ability to understand things that we do. This can be a little bit problematic if we start asking it to make decisions. So I'm not saying don't ask it to make a decision for you, but be careful when you do that. You want to make sure that you're kind of thinking through if you give it choices to make it kind of a simple choice, the more simple you can make it, the easier it will be for it to give you a good answer. If you're asking it to make a recommendation for you, and then also just be aware it's typically going to make a recommendation based upon what's publicly available. So if I ask it, where's a good taco place to eat? It's probably going to give me information locally, and it's going to be based upon, what other reviews are. So that may mean that I don't get, it's not going to tell me the new taco place to eat. It's just going to tell me what people have reviewed the most in my area. So if I'm traveling, I would want to either ask when I get there, or, find out ahead, do my research ahead of time, or, ask when I get there so it can be connected to my location. Or I'm going to, want to pre-plan that and actually tell it where I'm going to be, So it can figure that out. It is much faster than we can ever be. And so I think this is a big part of what we'll be talking about sort of when we talk about artificial intelligence and workflow management, is that it is much faster than we can just ever be. It can also work 24/7. I mean, I know in graduate school, I felt like I was awake 24/7, but I know that was not true. None of us can work 24/7 at this point in the evolution process of humanity. So, it's just going to be faster than us, and it's going to work work longer than we are, not necessarily harder, but it's going to work longer than we work. It can provide inspiration, ideas, answers, and synthesize information. And I think the most important thing is it really, to me, feels like the next technological revolution. So we kind of had the rise of desktop computing, and I wasn't in libraries when that happened, but I worked with a lot of folks who were at the end of their careers, getting near retirement, and they would just fill my new little catalogger metadata head with all kinds of stories of what it used to be like before computers were on everyone's desk. And I just ate that stuff up because I love hearing the history of libraries. But I do think this is going to be our next big change. And I think it's going to impact so many areas besides just us. And the reason why I say that is because every industry is talking about artificial intelligence. And that to me is a marker that means this is changing everything. It's not just us, but we're going to be the ones figuring out how we fit into this, of course. Just final caveats before we get to fun stuff. It is still experimental. If you go read most of the terms of services for these projects, and sometimes they'll just say straight up on the front page, like, this is experimental, use at your own risk kind of thing. It is still considered experimental. It is getting better every single day. And the images you've seen here, they're all artificial intelligence and created unless I have said otherwise. So, they look pretty good, right? I mean, they're perfectly usable. So, it does get better every day, and we can correct and we can train it. And so when you hear someone say training AI, that really means providing AI with some kind of data source. In our case, when we use ChatGPT or we use Copilot or we use Gemini, the data source is whatever is on the web, as well as whatever private data source they may have access to. So, Google has its own stuff. Microsoft has its own stuff. ChatGPT has some data sets that they've gotten from some research libraries and places like that. So they're all a little bit different in terms of the data that they are pulling from and the information they're pulling from, but primarily it's going to be what's publicly available on the internet. I think one of the things that is probably, to me, is the most concerning about artificial intelligence is that if you put information into it, like if you actually paste in information into ChatGPT or Copilot, Gemini, whatever it may be, it's very, very hard to pull content back. And in some cases, it's just impossible to pull it back. It's gone into the artificial intelligence at that point. So it may not be, if you put it into an OpenAI product or ChatGPT, it may just be there and it may not be over in Gemini or it may not be in Copilot yet. But if there's any sharing that happens sort of publicly, then it's going to be out there. So that does mean we need to be a little bit careful when we're using AI. This gets to really the ethical use of AI. We don't want to put things in there that are intellectual property, that we care about their intellectual property. And that's kind of a decision for you to make. For example, if I'm doing an event, the event's a one-time thing. It's not copyrighted. I'm not copywriting that news release about the event. So I'd fine for it to go into ChatGPT. It's going to be published on the website anyway, right? So anything published on the website that's going to be publicly available would probably be okay to put into ChatGPT. If you are working on your resume, or if you are reviewing employee applications, or if you're working on HR stuff, then you would want to be careful about what you did with ChatGPT. Now, you could copy and paste single pieces into it. So maybe you have just a section where you're like, oh, this just sounds kind of wordy and I'd like to tighten it up and polish it up a little bit. Or maybe I want to change the audience for this particular section. As long as it doesn't include personally identifiable information, and we, of course, in libraries are always concerned about, keeping our patron data safe, keeping our employee data safe, things like that. As long as it doesn't include personally identifiable data, that information, then it would, unless you personally have an issue with it. And if you have an issue with it, of course, don't put it into any of these things. But if it's something where you're like, yeah, this isn't, this doesn't have a person's name on it, doesn't have their birth date on it, it doesn't have an employee ID, it has no personally identifiable information, but I need to write a letter to them maybe you're writing a recommendation letter. I wrote 15 recommendation letters one time for one of my graduate assistants. And I was just like, oh, another one? I was getting to the point where I'm like, what did I write the last time? That one sounded good. And trying to dig through and stuff. You can pull out sections that wouldn't be identifiable, that if they were kind of in this artificial intelligence product, it would not matter, because it's going to be, if I'm writing a recommendation, as long as it doesn't include the person's name and place of employment and all that kind of stuff, I'm just writing a recommendation about maybe how what a good researcher they are and how well they learn, and how responsive they are, and how dedicated, and all those kind of things we write in recommendation letters. I could get artificial intelligence to either help me craft that part of it, or just write a little blurb for me that I could then pop into the thing that I'm actually writing. So you can use artificial intelligence in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be creating it from scratch. It can be, and that can be very helpful. It can also be to review or revise things you've already written or created, or it can just be parts of it. If there's something you've been working on that, and so we do this sometimes when we're editing stuff, right? You just kind of wordsmith it to death, right? You just keep going around and around and around. It's like it's still not quite there. If it doesn't include personally identifiable information or information that itself is already copyrighted, then I would say just pop it into one of those AI tools and see what happens with it, and see if you can get something better. So, anything that you're using, if you're asking it to give you information or to create information, that's coming typically from a public source already. So that it should be able to not only tell you some information that's publicly available, it should be able to cite some sources about that too. And then an example of private content would be something that you might write that you're asking it to review and revise. We, of course, are also starting to see our vendors are starting to roll out their own tools. So when you start using those, just take a look at, what the terms of service are. What are you agreeing to? I know we all hate to read those terms of services, but they really are important. Test the resource, kind of figure it out. We're starting to see HR software itself that has AI functionalities built into them. Those are typically safe because they are limited, and they're limited access, and they're limited to just that particular software. So of course you want to, anytime we're dealing with, in our world, what would be sensitive information, personally identifiable information of any kind, any kind of employee records, things like that, you might keep that more HRE kind of stuff. Any tool that would be rolled out to you or available to you, you just want to see how it does support not only protecting privacy and people's information and stuff like that, but just making sure that it would be safe to use with that kind of content. So as we continue towards getting past the unfun, the unfun part of talking about the sort of downsides or challenges a little bit of working with artificial intelligence, it is a workflow. So you're going to start with whatever you have. And in some cases, this may be you have nothing. Like, I don't know what I want. I just need a press release, or I am at a loss for ideas for, summer reading program giveaways. Like, what are we going to give away this year? We give away the same stuff every year. So you may have nothing, but even though you have nothing, because you're asking for artificial intelligence to give you ideas or give you resources, there is a data set, there is content behind that. So it's not just completely making up information, although it does sort of in a way, but it's looking at all of this information as a whole. Now, the making up piece of artificial intelligence, and where we hear this term artificial intelligence hallucinations, or I've been calling it misinformation. It can be called a lot of different things. Typically what happens is a few different things. One, it could be the data is not good to begin with. So if you give it a bunch of information, and there were early attempts to see how far they could push artificial intelligence in terms of baking in bias and all kinds of things. I mean, there were just some awful, I don't know how much of it was research projects to see how far it would be before artificial intelligence would break or push back, or if it was just people trying to see how much they could use that tool in a bad way. It can probably a little bit of both. But there were several big projects or several big impacts where people discovered significant bias or artificial intelligence telling people to do negative things, like that harmful acts and things like that. And so they have been putting parameters around that. So it can be the data's wrong or the data's not good. If artificial intelligence goes out and you've asked it, I'm having a bad day, give me some ideas to feel better, and it goes to a website that maybe a lot of people are talking about, but it's a website that is, very harmful things or things that would just not be healthy, then it may still pull those resources without realizing it, because its ability to evaluate resources is not the same as our critical thinking skills that we have. In some cases, that's good and bad. It doesn't have emotion associated with its choice. It's really just making its decision based upon a lot of other things, where we may preface the same resources we've always gone to because those are resources we know and love. They're credible resources, and we go right back to those all the time. Artificial intelligence doesn't have that kind of thing until, we tell it or somebody else is telling it, this is a good resource, or conversely, this is not a good resource. Stay away from this resource. Then we give it a prompt. So, it has the data on the back end, and the prompt can be a question. We can ask it to do something. So prompts are really instructions. And as I've already mentioned, the more specific you can be, the better. I have a list of prompts that are in the links to several lists of prompts that are in the resources guide. There's a lot of different prompts you can try and use. I would say just start with asking it a question, and you'll quickly see, whether or not you've given it enough information, or whether or not you need to give it more information or refine or review it. So we're going to start with some data source out there, or in our case, it may feel like we're starting with nothing because we don't know, but there is that information on the back end that artificial intelligence is looking at and pulling. And then we're going to ask it a question or ask it to do something. Now, if it goes and gives us incorrect information, or maybe it pulls together different information in a way that just doesn't make sense. And there's been a lot more talk about this in terms of hallucinations, where it seems like artificial intelligence is just fabricating information, but typically it's not just fabricating it. It's taking information from this source, from source A, B, C, D, and E, and it's squishing them together into a hodgepodge that is really none of those things. So the hallucination piece of it isn't absolutely fabricating it from nothing. There is a source in there somewhere, but how it uses that information and the lack of context in terms of for it being able to understand the information is where we get to that part of the kind of it makes things up. So once you ask it to do something, you want to review it. And this can be, we do these things when we're writing stuff, right? You start to write a blog post, or more, maybe you need to email a vendor, and we start writing it, and then we go, no, wait, that's not what I wanted to say, right? Or we start reading it over, like, oh, wait, I meant to CC my colleague over there so that she'll get this too. So we do that process of editing and reviewing with just about everything we do. And it's so baked into what we do as human beings when we're creating content that we just sort of don't think about it. I mean, maybe you do a glance to spell check, maybe you run spell check, or maybe you ask a colleague, would you read this and see what you think of that? Or if you are working collaboratively, then you may be passing it back and forth, and you two are editing and co-editing each other's writing to kind of get to that thing that you want to get to. So we do this process of review and tweaking and revising what we do all the time without even thinking about it. Sometimes we spend a lot of time on this. I know I have just agonized at times over writing things. And other times we do it very quickly, right? We read through it, we go, yep, that sounds good. Oh, I forgot to CC my colleague over there. Let me do that. Okay. Oh, I want to thank the vendor, and zip, there it goes, it's out the door. So sometimes we do it very quickly. Sometimes we take much more time with it, but there is that internal review process that happens. So we need to apply that to what we do with artificial intelligence as well, to make sure that we are getting the best results we can. So we want to be as specific as we can. And so, for example, the summer reading program prize idea, I'm out of ideas, give me some ideas. You can just ask it that, give me some ideas, or give me ideas. You don't even have to use some. That's the other thing, as succinct as you can be, and make sure to give it as much information as you can. So give me ideas for summer reading program prizes. That sounds good to us. Like if I was just kind of like, whoa, okay. But how does it know who is participating in the summer reading program? Does it even know what a summer reading program is? Would it know what appropriate prizes are? So I need to give it a little bit more information. And maybe I want to first break it out to kind of the age group, and then I'll see what it gives me. And then I will continue to refine it. So I could start with the give me ideas for summer reading program prizes, and I could see what it gives me. And it'll probably give me some ideas, and then I can refine it from there. I will say, well, refine that to, or limit that only to be for children ages 5 to 9, or whatever group I want to be. And I can keep going back to that original thing that I wrote, and that original information it gave me, and I can keep refining it until I get something that feels good. Fun thing to do. And if you don't have much information about yourself that's publicly available, this can be a fun task too, just to see what in the world will artificial intelligence come up. Write a biography for me. If I'm not logged in, it's not going to know who me is. Some of them may ask, and some of them may just kind of come up with whatever it can based upon whatever it can see that I did recently. Even if I put my name in, there's so many Robin Fays on the internet that it's going to hodgepodge me together. And the first time I did this, I had like 15 different careers. I mean, I was a librarian, I was a real estate agent, I was a doctor. I mean, I just had a whole bunch of different jobs. And that's all, that's all fine. It's a good experiment to kind of see what it'll give you. But then you need to say, no, I meant, or please refine too, so that it'll know that it didn't give you the right answer. Because otherwise it's going to think that, Robin Fay, the librarian, is the real estate agent, is the doctor, is the musician, and all the other 15 careers that I had. There are additionally some AI projects out there where you can actually download, and you can use code prompts, and they're a lot more code oriented. Those are in the resources guide as well, some of those. Typically what we're going to work with is going to be that generative and conversational AI, so that asking a question of it is perfectly acceptable for doing that. So this is my photo, because it is my dog when she was a puppyish still. You got to train the AI. And just like a puppy, if you don't tell them what they do is wrong, they just don't really know that. So we want to make sure that when we are working with AI, and especially if it gives you back something that you know is misinformation or wrong, you're like, oh my gosh, where did it get that? That is critical to give it some feedback. And there's multiple ways of giving it feedback. We're going to look at some in just a few minutes. Sometimes you downvote, or you can give comments, or whatever it may be. This does not take a lot of time to do. And I would say, especially things like Google search, and any asking it for resources or any reference style questions, if it's given you back information that is incorrect, go ahead and submit a report. You don't have to send a lot of information. You can just say, this was wrong. and this is what it should be, or just say this is wrong, so that at least there's some documentation that what it's giving is incorrect. Because it can be life or death if, people are asking it, for example, some medical question or really any kind of question, and it's giving back information that's just completely incorrect. And this is also going to be a challenge for us, of course, as we're working more with patrons who are interacting with artificial intelligence, what they may be experiencing and what kind of information they're getting, because they're not necessarily going to have the skills and sort of that information literacy that we have as part of our profession in terms of that critical analysis and to step back and say, is this right and why not? So we're going to have a lot of work to do there, because I think one of the things that I see, especially in the marketing of all these artificial intelligences, they don't say this up front. They don't say like, hey, use our new artificial intelligence. It might be right. There is no discussion of that at all. Instead, it comes out sort of through these examples and case studies where people say, this is what it posted, or this is what it told me, and it's completely incorrect. Like, I can prove this in any numerous resource that it's incorrect. So it does assume, without any correction or any trainings, that review and correction process, it does assume that what it's creating and what it's pulling together is correct. So, I beseech you as information professionals, please, if you ask, who, if you ask, any of your devices and it gives you back an answer that is just incorrect, then tell it. And if you're using one of the voice activated devices, you can just say that answer was not correct, or that answer was wrong, and it will record that information. Now, should we be having to correct and fix these software platforms? That is a whole conversation for another day. But as information professionals, we know that we and everybody else in the whole world, just about, who has a computer or a smartphone, is probably engaging with artificial intelligence. And this is one way that we can help in terms of making the information in the world better. Is one little thing we can do to help combat misinformation and disinformation, is not to make it worse. I know that's not much, but if we all do it, it helps. Every little step, right? So how do we train AI? There's so many different ways. In Copilot, you can give it a thumbs down. You can just, give it a little thumbs down, and you can just move on from there. You don't need to do anything else. Some will actually allow you to give comments and feedback. I did this with the Google search just recently, where the information it gave me was mashed up from 2 different sources, and I knew it was not correct. And so, I said, these search results are not correct. I did the report, and then I actually filled in a little bit more information, because it was, it was information. It was just information about how to do something within Alma, the ILS, but it combined the back end and the front end of combined Primo, the front end, and then Alma, the back end, together. And it was just like, anybody who tried to do that would have been completely lost, because it was just wrong. So, that was my little get deep for the day. Sometimes you will ask artificial intelligence questions and it will tell you that, it just can't answer your question. Copilot will do this more than the others, because they are putting parameters in a place around Copilot. That's the Microsoft product. There is a team that is still looking at putting more guardrails around it. So I am a little more fan of Copilot because of that. I do feel like they are trying. Now, whether or not that continues, I do not know, but I feel like they're at least trying to put some parameters around it. So if you ask it a question, it will sometimes tell you this: I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that. It apologizes, which of course, what does it care? It has no feelings, but it's trying to be conversational, right? And the other piece of it is then sometimes if you're for example, asking it to analyze a photo that has people in it, it will tell you, it has a nice little message that comes up and tells you that it cannot analyze people due to the restrictions around images of people. So they are starting to put some guardrails in place for some of these, and I think we're going to continue to have that question. So I think you will have a break about now. Is that correct?
Robin, sorry about that. I'm looking for my
Okay.
audio. But yes, we could have a quick little break. I think everyone would appreciate a rest for a few minutes.
Sure.
I don't know what's your timing feeling like? 5 minutes? 10?
Yeah, if we could do about five minutes, it's okay if you need a little bit more, but if we could do about 5 minutes, that'd be fantastic, just to give everybody a stretch moment, if nothing else.
Really good. Okay, everyone, we'll take 5 and we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Okie dokie. I think I'm at about 5 minutes. So we'll just get back to it. So there are what I see as three main choices in terms of what's easily publicly available. There's ChatGPT, which is that OpenAI project. There's Copilot, which is Microsoft's project. There's Gemini, which is the Google project. And then there's Meta AI, which is quickly just sort of integrated into all of Facebook's products and continuing to be integrated into Facebook's products. You can opt out of some of the Facebook artificial intelligence. So if you don't want to see summaries, if you don't want it to be interacting with you and messaging, you can opt out of that. And I do have in the resources handout the link to where you can opt out if you're interested in that. As for the other three, it's really going to just, and I've already talked about this, which tool do you like best, which works the best for you. I do like Copilot because I do like that it provides the citations for the resources it's gathering for you, for the resources it's consulting sort of as, matter of fact, but you can get citations from ChatGPT and Gemini, and Jessica kind of tipped me off to how to get ChatGPT to do it. Is you just have to do that when you're actually working on your prompt. So you have to ask it to provide you resources with citations. So there are ways to get it to cite resources, and that is helpful because of course that makes it easier than to check to see whether or not the information it is giving you is accurate. I've not found Copilot yet to give me information that's inaccurate. That's the only one that I haven't had that experience with yet. It could just be my own luck or what I'm working on when I'm working on Copilot. So, you'll kind of figure out what works best for you. One of the other things I like about Copilot is that if you actually sign up to have a Copilot account, there's no cost to do that. It will work with DALL-E, which is the image creation tool, and you get to use that for free. You are limited to how many images you can create, but I've yet to hit my limit. And I mean, I create a lot of images for PowerPoint presentations and stuff. So it is helpful to me in that way. Again, you have to sign in. So if you just go to Copilot on the web, you ask it to create an image for you. Unless you're logged in and signed in, you've already signed up for that DALL-E and Copilot account. Unless you do that, it's not going to provide you with any images. It's going to tell you it doesn't support it. So it does support that, and it is an integrated process. It's just that you have to do that at the time that you're you have to log in first in order to get to do that. Gemini, I know they've worked on it a lot, and you can actually download a copy through their nonprofit. It is part of Search now. To me, the actual Gemini product has been the most unstable. Kind of, they take things down and put things back up. Sort of, it feels sometimes a little bit at random. And so it is a little bit more experimental, but it does seem to work a little bit better with data than ChatGPT and Copilot does. So it's one of the things to just take a look at. It is very much more experimental than the other two, and I think they're really working on it very hard in terms of seeing how far they can expand AI. And I think Microsoft's doing the same thing, but Microsoft has a much more stable product sort of in the meantime that we can use with Copilot, whereas Gemini feels like it's much more experimental as a whole. The search piece of it is not quite as experimental, but again, I do not have as much success using the Gemini search in Google as I do if I go to Copilot and ask it a question and it gives me those citations and stuff. So just experiment. You'll kind of figure out which one works best for you for what you want to do. So what kinds of things can you do? Well, anything that you do on scale, anything that's repetitive, what I think of as big work, you have to do a bunch of it, then it can help with that. Now, again, with the usual caveats about personnel related information and things like that, You know, you would need to be careful in terms of having it organize things, but it can certainly do things like summarize notes, articles, project reports, things like that. I read a lot of articles sometimes, and I try to read, of course, our scholarly articles that are published in our field about artificial intelligence and data and things like that. I also read in the semantic web community publications, and those get really technical sometimes, a little more technical than even my skill set. And I do find that artificial intelligence, asking it to summarize key points for me, is so helpful. Like, I can really get bogged down in trying to sort out, you know, what they're talking about with Python processing or some kind of programming, because although I have those skills, it's not as deep as, you know, the person who's written that article. And so I get kind of bogged down in trying to connect that to what I know. And just having the key takeaways summarized just helps kind of pull me back to that higher level. So I'm not just kind of in the weeds trying to figure out now, like, how did they do this and what did they do? I can kind of understand the article a different view. So it is very helpful for me in terms of summarizing articles. I have also used it. I have the Google Gemini connection. So if you do have Gmail, there is a plugin, and I'll show you all just briefly what that looks like, but there's a plugin for Google for Gmail, and it will do things like summarize your emails and things like that. Now, do you feel comfortable doing that? Is this Gmail for work versus Gmail personal? You know, all of those kinds of things. So your usual caveats about using technology still apply for artificial intelligence. I know some libraries can't use Gmail at all. I was at a Google library and I was in an anti-Google library. So never were those two to meet, I guess. But there are tools that can be used to do even things like help you with your email and things like that. I also find inspiration to be just fantastic. When I am stuck, I am terrible at writing bios for myself. I am terrible at doing an elevator pitch. You know, I struggle sometimes finding images. I know when I've worked in libraries, we didn't have a big budget for stock photography. And at one point we were trying to build our own stock photography library in Google. And so we were asking all of our branch managers to take photos of events. And of course, you need to ask people if it's okay or tell them they're taking photos. And then if you take photos with children in them, of course, that's a whole nother situation to deal with. And then we were trying to collect up the photos. That was one of my assignments, was to be the keeper of all of these photos. And then of course the other piece of it was, then I had to also tag them in a way so that people could find them. And then I had to edit most of the photos because of course they were taken on cell phones. And of course this was like 10 years ago. So cell phone photos weren't what they are now for sure. But, you know, I had to do a lot of like photo editing and things like that never was expected to do that. It was just like, oh yeah, everybody will submit photos and you'll put them in this folder and we'll all be able to find them. And of course, that's not really how those things work very well. So it was a lot more work these days. And even for years when I would teach, if I saw a photo that was like, oh, that's a good photo of a librarian or library staff or an event, and I'm not using that for anything right now, but I'm just going to save that photo. I don't know if anybody else does this, like, oh, I'm just going to save that photo. I'm going to save that article because I might want it again, or I might want to use that photo again. Of course, you can't find them once you do that. But I just had this massive collection of what I had created of kind of my own stock photography and own clip art based upon things that I had found that were, you know, freely available and that I could reuse. Of course, there are now free stock photo websites out there that make things a little bit easier too, but finding that right photo can be so hard to get, right? And with artificial intelligence, it's like the least hard thing to do. I just tell it what I want and it gives me a bunch of images, and then I go, nope, 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 that wasn't it. And then I refine it until I get something that I like. And it takes me maybe, I don't know, to create a whole PowerPoint's worth of photos, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour at the most. If I'm really being, you know, picky, it might take me an hour. So it's really, really helpful for that kind of stuff in terms of creating content or giving you ideas for content. Reviewing and copy editing, I use this every day. I don't know how many people do. I love Grammarly. It is really the coding piece of it is really mixed when it comes to like data work and like traditional cataloging and stuff like that, which we're not really talking about today anyway. But anything else we do in libraries, we can probably use artificial intelligence for, and of course for research and discoverability. So just to kind of show you what Copilot looks like, I know that you all have probably seen Copilot, but once you have Copilot, you'll start seeing these little icons, and in Google, you'll see when you're looking at your Gmail or in Google Drive, you'll see a little diamond, and that's the logo for Gemini is the diamond. For Copilot, it's the little ribbon, and I can't remember off the top of my head what ChatGPT is, but it shows up, and a lot of times it'll say ChatGPT next to it. But the little ribbony swirl thing here is the Microsoft AI product. And so if you have the Microsoft AI product, it'll start just showing up and things. And there's actually additional plugins and tools and things like that that you can use with Excel or whatever. But if you're in Edge, it's just right there at the top. And if you have Copilot, or you can go to copilot.microsoft.com, that's another way you can do things. You can go there. And once you're in there, you can just kind of pop it open and do whatever you need to, and then go right back to what you're doing. So if I'm going to post something in LinkedIn, maybe I already have some verbiage I've written, or I have a topic in mind, or I have a whole bunch of ideas that is going to be like 5,000 words or more. And I want artificial intelligence to just pick out one topic and help me kind of flesh that out for a much shorter, briefer post. It can easily do that and help me kind of break those topics up. So it's wonderful for writing content. Again, it is just one tool. There's other ways that we do other tools out there that we use. Spell check and Microsoft, it works really well for the most part, and it's built-in functionality. Now, when you see that add to a dictionary functionality, if it comes up with a word and it tells you the word's not spelled correctly, or it's missing, it'll say, add to dictionary. That typically means you're just working with the traditional Microsoft spell check and you're not working with artificial intelligence, but you will see artificial intelligence behavior through other places within Microsoft Word or any of the Office products. You can also use something like Grammarly that's kind of sits on top of everything. And I have the Grammarly plugin. I use it for everything. Grammarly has made me a better writer. I use however a whole lot, way more than I realized until I started using Grammarly, and it does catch those. It also catches and you heard my little informal language there. It does also catch those if those slip into writing. If I'm writing for a particular audience, Grammarly will help keep me on track in terms of alerting me when I am kind of shifting in and out of my audience. So, and my tone that I want to stick with. I want to stick with professional. I might not use way more as a word. So there's so many things you can do with artificial intelligence. We've already touched on some of these social media posts, announcements, any of those things, revising your writing, asking for ideas for an event or activity, ask it to summarize an article for you. Next time someone sends something to your desk, a link to read, an article to read, anything that they're like, hey, you should read this, or you should check this out. We're sharing as a profession, we like to share with each other. Anytime someone shares something with you, you can pop that link right into ChatGPT or Copilot or even Gemini and say, hey, summarize this. Like I said, I think Gemini, or I think Copilot and ChatGPT do that a little bit better, but Google can do it fairly well too. You can also ask it to do things, and these are sometimes you'll see them in your various apps, or you'll see them in your various software called magic tools. And we'll notice this in Canva when we talk about that in just a few minutes, that these will be called frequently called magic tools. And these will be things that will guide you through the process of like cleaning up images or creating templates and things like that. And just see how it goes. So here's one example of using Copilot, and I'm going to slide through just a little bit because we've kind of talked through some of these already. But some of the things you can do, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we kind of get towards the end of the session, is you can really change or adjust the tone. So I have already touched on that in Grammarly. You can also do the same sort of thing in Copilot. You can ask in ChatGPT, you can also ask it to write to a particular audience or a particular tone. You know, it's all subjective, of course, whether or not I find something funny or succinct or enthusiastic. But, you know, there are things that when we're looking at more marketing oriented verbiage, that there are words that those adjectives and things like that that we throw in that are more of that kind of tone. So experiment with the tone, and especially as you're thinking about how artificial intelligence can help you in your daily life, to be able to, you know, think about like, oh, it can do that for me. I need to take this information about the event and it needs to go to 5 different audiences, including the staff. Think about how artificial intelligence can help you with that, because it really can help you save time. It can generate those really, really quickly. It's just, you just need to take a few minutes to, you know, kind of get the AI going and then just make sure you're getting the answer you want. This is an example for Grammarly, but I can ask it to improve what I want. Now, this is a very over the top bio written for me by ChatGPT, and there's some problems in this. This was before I corrected it. But, you know, even I can use ChatGPT to create something, and then I can even paste it into a document or anything, paste it right into Grammarly. If I have a professional account, I can ask it to improve it. I can ask it to analyze it. I can ask it to, you know, do basic things like spell checking and stuff. So there are lots of tools that we can use at our disposal. All of the accessibility checks, or most of the accessibility checks now that are in Microsoft products and in YouTube and in Facebook, are now using artificial intelligence in some way. Typically, if you're using anything that's an auto review process or it runs through some kind of wizard, that's where we're starting to see the artificial intelligence come into play. So certainly when you are creating your materials, and I'll run this through accessibility test checker again before I send it on today, but that ability to be able to quickly run through an accessibility checker versus in the olden days when most of us didn't do it unless we had to, just because it took so long to make a document accessible. And now there are actually tools built in to help do that. So don't overlook your own tools that are in your own products. There are lots of AI tools for Gemini working with Google products. So that's the other piece of it too, is if you're working with Microsoft, there's going to be a lot more Copilot integration for Microsoft. Now there is overlap between the two. So there are open AI ChatGPT tools that can work with Microsoft products. There are Gemini tools that can work with some of the Microsoft products and all of that kind of stuff. So there is overlap, but whatever platform you're working in, if you're working with Google, you're going to find many more tools and support for Gemini than you're going to find for the other products. If you are working with Microsoft, you're going to find much more support for Copilot. So that may also impact which tool you use, which one's easier to use, which one is the most accessible, but there's just all kinds of tools out there. If you use a Google Workspace and you have the marketplace, and the marketplace isn't necessarily paid stuff, although there are some paid things in there, you can just find all kinds of stuff that's Gemini related. And this is an example of summarizing emails. This isn't my email, but this was an example that was used. But I do find that this is a particularly helpful tool in Gmail if you feel comfortable using it. I activate it and deactivate it at times because I don't necessarily feel comfortable with AI digging around in my email that way. But there are certainly times when I have a thread where there's a lot of discussion and I feel like I'm missing something. Sometimes asking it to summarize it will help bring those missing things to the top, just because threaded messages can get a bit challenging. ChatGPT, we've already talked a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit more about it as we are looking at our follow along. So we've talked about many of these things already, about how you can use AI to create some marketing materials. You can use it to design posters and flyers and things like that. Canva, certainly one of your tools at your disposal. Another tool at your disposal is the Facebook Manager. If you have a Facebook page, and I'll touch on that just briefly, you can use it to take those news posts or blog posts or any content that you've written, and you can repurpose that content, have it revise it to be more of a social media post. So you could do that. You could even use it to create, say, a week's worth of social media posts for the library social media account. Now, that's going to take a little bit of time to set up and kind of organize and figure out what you're going to post and when you're going to post it and things like that. That's just part of it all. There's only so much AI can really do for us. Eventually, there are tools to create and schedule content, but those two features are not completely integrated. So you remember at the beginning when I was talking about it wasn't completely independent? That's a good example of where it's not completely independent. There are a lot of tools to create social media content. There are also, of course, just using like ChatGPT or using Copilot and using them to create the content and then pasting it into your social media. And then you can use your scheduling tool to, set it for the various days of the week. So it's not a completely independent process. We can use it to create the content, and then we can use it to post the content. But those are not, they can be connected, but they're not automated. So I think that's the other piece to think about too, is when you are working on whatever you're doing, think about how you can break it into steps and where artificial intelligence can help you. Because it may be that artificial intelligence can't help you with the whole process, but it can help you with part of a process. And that's where we really need to be looking at where we can save some time and have some efficiency gains, because we're all wearing so many hats and there's just more work than we'll ever do. And I think regardless how big or small a library you are, there's just more work than we'll ever do in our lifetimes, each of us individually and all of our staffing too. I mean, it's just, if you have a moment, I guarantee you some work will find you. It just happens. So, how can we maximize artificial intelligence? So maybe some of the things that have gotten pushed to the side, or projects that we have put on our to-do list for 5 years, that we can go back and go like, okay, now we have time to do that. Or we have a system migration coming up, or we have this project coming up and we need to spend some time on it. So I'm going to see how I can use artificial intelligence to help me. So you can use Copilot to come up with all kinds of things. And one of the things that I asked it to do was to come up with some ideas for outreach to freshmen at a university or community college. Like, how would you outreach to freshmen? Should I have to do that? What kind of ideas would it come up with? And it came up with some really cool ideas. It came up with an idea of a library scavenger hunt and a murder mystery game that required students to explore the library and learn about its collection, staff, and facilities. What a cool, oh my gosh, I would have loved to have done that as an undergraduate. That would have been so fun. And then, there's creating a personal librarian program where you're assigning a librarian to an individual student. That may or may not be feasible in some libraries or institution, but it's a really cool idea. And then, your basics, what I would probably come up with: participate in orientation, participate in welcome week, get out of the library, have a library booth, those basic kinds of things that like I said, last one, I would have come up with all those. The murder mystery game, I would not have come up with. And because this was Copilot, it gave me a citation to where it got that idea. So then I went and read about what that library did, and I thought, wow, that is the coolest thing ever. The other thing you can do when you get a citation, if it does link to an article or a library website or something, if you feel brave enough, reach out to that colleague and say, like, hey, I saw that you all did this murder mystery game. What was your success like? How did the students like it? And you can connect and network with people that way too. And maybe not only have a new pal, and a new colleague, but you might get some good information as well. So there's lots of things that we can do. So if you do have an artificial intelligence tool open, go ahead and open it up, or go ahead and get it ready. And I'm just going to kind of give you this general prompt of generate event ideas for teens for summer reading, for a summer reading program. So you can just ask it that. You can try being more specific. You can try giving it a theme or subject. If you know what your reading program may be this summer, or if you don't know what your reading program theme is, you could just pick something. It could be dogs or foxes or camels or animals or cars or whatever you want to pick. And then you can also ask it to target it for that age level and see, or that age range. You can give it an age range. You can ask for teens or young adult, whatever verbiage you want to try to see what you get out of it. And for those of you who are not doing that, if you have any questions for me, you can let me know, and you can post them in the chat if there's any. Oh, I do see some questions. Oh, it just suggested a murder mystery. Was it listening? Well, it could be. It could be. It's hard to know. Yeah, I do agree that this point about some of the things that it creates really seem real, and that, you really do need to confirm the citations. And that is so true. Oh, look at the ideas it's given you. Do a book drive and a little free library build. Wouldn't that be a cool idea to get teens involved in, though? Like to actually build a little free library someplace and to have them part of the building process, and maybe picking out some books to go into it. I think that's a really cool idea. Yeah, I love the fact that it can give you, oh, these ideas are way better than mine. Exactly. That was the thing that got me. It's like, what was my ideas? It was these right here at the end. Participate in campus events, survival skills challenge. Oh my goodness, when I have not loved that as a kid. I would have been all over that. I was a Girl Scout, so that would have been just like, wow, that would have been so cool to do. But it does come up with some really interesting things to think about. And so I ask it for prizes, because I know every public library I've worked with, we're like, what do we do? The same thing every year. And so, it kind of gave some ideas about like how to do some summer reading, prize kind of things. Now, some of these are kind of things that we would have to adapt for our particular program. If you read 8 books and then you record them in a journal, then what would you get? That kind of stuff. So sometimes you really do have to kind of look at it and think about how you're going to adapt to it. Oh, look, a creative writing workshop. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? And book to movie nights, like to read the book and then watch the movie and talk about it. That's a cool one, though. I love that. That's a cool one. I mean, because I think that kind of connection and having people talk about things without it does kind of involve technology and the fact that they may be watching on a particular device, but then that conversation piece of it, I just think we don't have enough of that. So as you can see from just your examples that you all have done, wow, what interesting ideas it came up with. And some of them may be very feasible and some of them may not be. You know, you start looking at the list and you go, yeah, we could do that one and we couldn't do that one. That's okay. If you even get one or two like really great ideas, then you know, there's some new ideas. And you know what? Those ideas may spark even more ideas from yourself, right? You go off, you think about it, and you think like, murder mystery night for teens. What would that look like? Oh, I should do this for my adult book club. Oh, what would the kid scavenger fun? You know, it may really start to give you all kinds of ideas. So gonna skip through just a little bit because I do want to talk a little bit more about Canva. I do just want to mention that you can use Facebook if you have a Facebook page for your library, and I don't know how you will do your social media, but do take a look at the business manager part of it and the planner piece of it. And I'll have to admit, Facebook's not the easiest to use when it comes to this stuff, but the planner will actually tell you like some of the holidays and stuff. So it'll kind of say like this is happening, but it will allow you to be able to, you can see here, there's March 8th was, I forget what March 8th is exactly, but it tells me a holiday there. So I could find some story or ask it to create some content for that particular story on it. But that is a great, you know, a great thing to do. Oh, I like this idea of when you have an idea, get it to write out a very specific project plan, planning work done in 15 minutes. Yeah, I love that. I use it for a lot of project plans. So that's the other thing too, you can use it for that at a really high level. Like if there are things that you're working on that you're struggling with, you can ask it to help you come up with a plan for how to do that. And it may also help you see that maybe you need some help. Like, you know, if you have a whole bunch of things to do, then you may see that what it creates for you is so humongous that like, how can one person do this? And you can then see like, are there places artificial intelligence can help me? And how can I leverage that to, you know, be able to create some of this, or do maybe I need to look for whatever help I can get, you know, make a case for a position, a volunteer, an intern, whoever it may be that can help you. But if you are using social media, do take a look at the business manager because that's where you can plan and you can also schedule and cross post from here. Now, the only artificial intelligence piece of it that it really does here is it will give you like the holidays and stuff like that. So you can use that to kind of key off and give you ideas, but it will also tell you the best time to schedule. So if you typically have people who are looking at your Facebook page at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon for whatever reason, then it's going to tell you that. And it's also going to tell you which days of the week people are most likely to look at your content. So I know we're always looking for our return on investment and, you know, the most bang that we can get for social media, and especially using it on the cheap. So take a look at your Facebook business manager if you have not already, and take a look at what it's telling you in terms of your analytics, but also what suggestions it makes for you for when to post. Sometimes we have to post when we need to post, right? You know, water main break and we got to close the building. I mean, we just got to post, right? There is no waiting for the right time, but other times we can use this. So as we kind of wrap up here, get close to the end here, I want to talk a little bit about images. We've already talked about images already. And as you can see from the images, they're pretty good. Now you look at some of these hands and you think, they're not that good. So certainly you can, you know, revise and tweak things and stuff like that. You can also ask it to give you more information. In my case, I said a librarian wearing glasses and a cardigan holding a book. And this is sort of what it gave me. So they're sort of all the same, right? They're sort of the same age range and things like that. If I were doing this in real life for more than demonstration, I would probably want it to be a little bit more representative of what my community looked like and more ages and things like that. So I would add more to this and probably do a few more takes of that. Again, Copilot, you can ask from within Copilot to create images for you. The downside, besides occasionally hands being a little unusual, I think for the most part, things are getting better all the time. So just kind of be aware of that. When you create images with any of these artificial intelligence tools, just take a look at them, make sure that, you know, the people are, they look peoply to us, right? Make sure that they look the way that we would expect them to look. Sometimes if you're asking it to create images of, say, people with adaptive technology, it will kind of struggle with the placement of that technology. So if they're in a wheelchair, or they're using a cane, or they're using some kind of other device, it may struggle with kind of like how they look in that particular, or interacting with that piece of technology. And same thing with people in front of computers. It sometimes has a little bit of trouble with perspective. So if it doesn't look right to you, just start over, or ask it to refine it a little bit more to try to get something that looks a little bit more accurate. You don't have to be any kind of amazing photographer. It will give you, Copilot will give you 4 images in less than a minute, regardless what you put in. They may not be images that you want to use. You may have to work on it a little bit, but you will at least have those images created pretty quickly. Aside from sort of people looking kind of odd in terms of how their bodies are positioned in space, the other thing that happens is if you ask it to create things that have text and images combined, it will struggle with that. I keep doing this with Copilot to see how much better it gets, and it's still kind of hit and miss. I gave it my name spelled correctly. It did get my name right, mostly. There's one where my name's misspelled. And I gave it the word librarian spelled correctly, obviously. And I don't think it spelled librarian right in any of these, no. So it does struggle with images and text. And I've had a lot of conversations with people who are working with AI and developing it. And there's been some conversation about how much of it's by design and how much of it is how AI functions, and how it understands when you're asking it to create an image, it's seeing text as an image as well. So there's a lot of reasons for this. I do love some of these logo kind of things. I thought they were really cool. But you know, the spelling piece of it is a problem. So Canva. If you use Canva, and I know all of you should have access to Canva. So see Jessica, if you need to talk to her about Canva. Canva allows you to not only post across social media, so it gives you the option to be able to post to various things. One of the most valuable things two of the most valuable things that Canva does is, one, you can set up what's called a brand. And in that brand, you can put your logo or your graphics or whatever. And then when it suggests things, it will try to coordinate it to go with your colors and things like that more. See, that's very helpful, right? Because then we have things that automatically look nice without having to do any extra work, right? So it's not always 100% successful. And some things are still a little garish or a little funky or whatever. And if you have a lot of colors in your logos, then that, of course, doesn't, you're going to have more choices, which is good, but then they may not feel as cohesive color wise, but it's pros and cons to that. But it will do that. And the other thing that they're doing is they're constantly rolling out more artificial intelligence under what's called Magic Studio. So in addition to the fact that you can create, and they have so many templates, I know my Canva users in here are like, yeah, it's wonderful. It has so many templates. If I want to create a Facebook post with an image, it has that. If I want to create, any kind of document, an Instagram, it has that. It has all kinds of templates already set up, and it has tons of content that you can just customize. All of this Spring Fling stuff over here, I did not create any of that. I just typed in library Spring Fling, and there's some of the images it gave me. And there's more. That was just the first 6 that came up. So there's all kinds of styles. I can customize those. Those are built into the templates. So, that's great for social media, right? All that little meme stuff and Giphy stuff that we all love. You can easily do it in Canva. And then the Magic Studio piece of it has all kinds of artificial intelligence tools to help you even more. So if you are a Canva user and you've not explored the Magic Studio, it'll appear down here on your left sidebar. Dig around till you find the Magic Studio, and we'll see you next year when you get done exploring all the things Magic Studio can do, because it is really cool. It will help you write content. You can actually ask it to just create stuff and it will, and it looks really good. So Canva, lots of good stuff there. And if you're not using it, take a look at it because it will save you time. We've already talked about copy editing, editing your own stuff. We've talked about accessibility. We've talked some about modifying content for different audience and versions. This to me is really helpful. I need to sometimes send out what I think of as more marketing type of stuff, like here are the workshops I'm teaching. And so I send out sort of a Robin Fay, blah, 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 you know, those kind of things. And here's the workshops I'm teaching. And then there are other people who I have worked with before and they know me, and I don't need that kind of marketing blurb. I need to just highlight things that would be appropriate for their libraries. Like I know that they would want to know, they would want a session on this, or this is something they've asked for before. And so I need more targeted stuff for them. So they don't need that general, like, hey, here's Robin Fay, she teaches these workshops. They need, here's this workshop that I think is appropriate for your library. And I have these others because they already know me. They don't need my, you know, my little dog and pony show. They don't need any of that. And then I have other things where I just need to let people kind of know, like they've already expressed interest. And so we've already talked about it. Or maybe they've asked me for a training list and I just need to kind of give them that information. So it's like they don't need any promotional stuff. They just want to know what my training list is. And so to kind of give them that information. And so being able to kind of write for those different audiences, although they're very similar, they do have a little bit different needs. My public libraries, the systems that only support public libraries versus the systems that only support academic libraries, they have a little bit different needs too in terms of what kind of content they're looking for. So, you know, being able to write to those different audiences is very helpful for me. And I use artificial intelligence to help me craft the body of that email, and then I just pop it into my Gmail account and mail it on. So I don't know if we have time for another follow along. We're getting close for time. You can do this one on your own at another time, but I ask it, and the reason why I want to talk about this one is I ask it to write a brief promotional blog post introducing an adult book club that would start meeting the first Monday of every month starting May 25th, May 2025. And the first book we're going to read is 1984. Well, Copilot said, oh no, I can't help you with that. And I thought, why is Copilot not doing this? Why is it being so resistant to helping me? Has it become intelligent? It doesn't want to help? No, it was flagging on the word adult. And so one of the things to be mindful of when you are working with AI is the things that we are asking it to kind of think about the words you're using as well. And what's even more funny to me is when I ask artificial intelligence to create an image of an adult book club that's meeting to discuss 1984. And I do love that created that little cover there for me. I thought that was just the coolest thing that it did. It keyed on the word adult and it gave me a group of people that are all kind of the same demographic age. So in its particular view of artificial intelligence, adult means, you know, I would say a little older demographic than maybe I would envision as what I would think of as an adult book club. But it did make me laugh that Copilot just told me it couldn't help me. And it took me a minute to key off and think, oh, that word means something different in other industries. So think about the words you use and see, you know, as you're going along, if you do get an answer back of, I can't help you, or that, you know, I can't answer that question, carefully review the words you've used in your prompt to see if there's anything that might be a flag. Because some of them, like Copilot, are trying to build those parameters around it, around certain things to make it a safer environment. Others are not. So in this case, if I was not able to get anything from Copilot, and I was, when I changed, I took out the word adult and I just left it, as a reading club, book club thing, it gave me a wonderful, very enthusiastic, because I chose enthusiasm, very enthusiastic approach to, my particular topic. So it is something that is just, you just kind of have to think about depending upon what you get. Now, we are so excited. And then it says up here, we have fantastic news for you. And then it goes on to say, we are so excited. And it's very much excitement all over the place. Depending upon my library and kind of how the person who's coordinating the book club feels about it, that may be a little too much excitement. You know what I'm saying? The tone may not fit us, but it's a good start. And there's some things in there that I really like whether you've read 1984 before or it's your first time. I really liked that. We know that's a classic and lots of people have read it, but I liked that. And there's other things that we could work into this as well. So, it is an interesting place to kind of help us in terms of getting along. So I know that this has come out in terms of some of our discussions. We talked about already summarizing what you've read. You can use it to sort through content. Again, this depends upon what software you're using. We talked about Google Photos already. You can use it to make book recommendations or recommendations on a theme. Now, again, with patron data, if there's something built into the ILS we're using that's a recommendation service, that's a little bit different than just kind of throwing things into ChatGPT, but certainly you could do it based upon your own stuff, right? It is a lot of excitement for a dystopian novel. It is. So yeah, I think that's the thing too. And the prompt could be the suggestion of changing the prompt. The prompt could be book club for adults. And that's the other piece of it too, is if you do hit something where it just isn't answering you, review your prompt. That's really the first place to kind of think about it. Go back and look at your prompt and then decide, oh, could this be interpreted in a different way, or am I not giving it enough information? And then you can kind of choose how you want to deal with it. The other thing I've found as a person who has managed a lot of, especially new to the workforce, employees over the years, is sometimes I would struggle with, and I talked about writing my recommendation letters for my graduate student earlier, but I would just struggle with sort of the, doing the employee reviews. How many times can you write this person is great? And I just felt like I was kind of saying the same thing over again. Now, I wouldn't want to do my whole evaluation in ChatGPT or Copilot or anything like that. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But certainly if there are specific task or performance standards and this person has more than excelled, then I would snip out that part of the job evaluation and throw it into ChatGPT and say, this person has really excelled at this. Please write me 2 sentences or 1 sentence, whatever I need to write. Please write me a little bit of information about this and see what it gives me, because it will choose different words than I will, and it will come up with some ideas that I would not have maybe thought of, and some different language that I would probably like, that I would think, wow, that sounds really great, but it might not be language that I would necessarily choose. So when you get kind of stuck in a rut, you just kind of stuck with oh, I'm kind of stuck doing the same thing over again. Use artificial intelligence to see how you can get yourself unstuck. What other ideas can it give you? And this can also be, it can also be helpful. Another example that I thought was really interesting, I have not tried this before, but I know we've all had to have difficult conversations with our employees at times. You know, if you haven't had to have a difficult conversation with an employee yet, it will happen at some point in your career. And hopefully you only have to do it once or twice, and, don't have to do it more than that. I only had to do it, I think, twice, and it was terribly painful for all of us. I know. But, one of those things is we do want our employees to grow, and we want them to be successful, and we want them to be able to contribute and to feel good about their workplace. And sometimes things happen outside of the workspace that impacts us, right? I mean, we don't work in vacuums. We are not robots. We are not artificial intelligence. We have feelings. We have things that happen to us. And so, getting people back on track can be sometimes a little bit challenging. And of course, we want to be empathetic and kind, and we want our employees to be great, right? And so it can give you some really good ideas, I think, for like how to have that conversation, or if there are various performance standards an employee is struggling with, like ideas for training or things you might be able to do to help that employee. And you don't have to put that employee's name in ChatGPT or Copilot or any of those things. You can just snip out that performance standard that you see that employee struggling with. Or maybe you're doing your evaluation and you want to give that employee they've got some growth potential there, and you want to not only highlight the success they've had so far, but you want to encourage them to continue to grow. And you're sort of struggling with, like, okay, what would be the next logical thing here? Or they've asked for cross training, or maybe you think cross training would be useful for them and you're trying to kind of figure out how to approach that. It can help with helping to plan that workflow, or helping to plan what their day might look like in terms of the tasks they might do. But you can also use it to help with those conversations, of coming up with some ideas to help brainstorm those conversations as well. So you all have shared so many great ideas, and I know we're on time. So I want to I'm going to kind of breeze through these last couple here as you all hang with me for just a couple of seconds more. You all know this: experiment, use the AI. And I know it may take a little bit of time to kind of figure out what works the best for you and what's going to be the most useful. But once you see how much time is going to be saved using the AI, then it's going to make it much easier to kind of lean into it and embrace it. So try different prompts, refine them. That suggestion to, rather than adult book club for adults. Yes, same thing with your, sort of the teen audience. You may want to define it to what the age range is, if you have a particular age range. I know I've worked in a public library where teens started at like 10. And so that felt kind of young for me for what I would think of as a teenage, but that was our age range. So I wanted, when we were doing things, we would have to make sure, like, some of the program, virtual reality and gaming and programming and things like that, would be appropriate to a much younger person. Ask for citations or sources. Where did you get that info? You can try that, but you can also include it into your prompt, and that will probably be your key for ChatGPT and for Gemini. Copilot should give you citations, but you can ask for them if it does not. The other thing you can do is to please make sure to just at least click on the links it gives you and see if it matches. Depending upon how much review you actually want to do, you may want to look at the article and see whether or not it's actually, does the article match the citation? Is the information accurate? That kind of stuff. Or you may, if you're in Copilot, you may just click on the link and go, yes, that looks like it matches. In this case, it does not matter so much. And you'll know for things that, do not matter. If I'm getting ideas for a summer reading program, does it matter if the citations are accurate exactly or not? It probably matters less, but I would want to report if the citation was non-existent. I clicked on the link and it went to, I don't know, some news media site that had nothing to do with summer reading or nothing to do with prizes for events or something. I would still want to report that kind of thing. So keep up with AI news. You all are doing that and continue learning about it. We already talked about training, but that is an important piece of this, is to correct it. It can be really easy, just that thumbs up, thumbs down, star it if it's right. There's all different kinds of processes. It's going to depend upon the tool. Consider how you can incorporate AI and which tool into your work regularly. There are going to be places where it's going to be a big nope, and we've already talked through some of those. We've talked about being aware of challenges of AI and using AI ethically. I think we've touched on that a little bit. You'll want to practice a little bit more in terms of constructing good prompts. And I know Jessica has done a lot of work with prompts, so she's a good resource as well. But there are some good resources in that resource guide too in terms of prompts. But just consider every time you ask it something, how you can make it the most clear so that there's no confusion about what you're asking it. Think about if you ask a 2-year-old a question. A 2-year-old that has maybe a large vocabulary, but you want to be very clear and make sure that you're asking exactly what you need to know. And you may need to give it more information. The other thing we're going to need to be all thinking about is how we advocate for our work in the age of AI. I think it's very easy for people, especially outside of libraries and outside of organizations, to think that like AI is just going to take over the workforce. I mean, that's just silly. But I think there is a little bit of that thinking as a whole, like, oh, AI will do it. We'll just get rid of the air traffic controllers and AI will do it. Yeah, that's not really going to be successful yet. Eventually, we may get to a workforce like that, but it's going to be a while. So I think we need to be able to talk about like if we're using like how AI is helping us. We don't want to be seen as not leaning into or bracing AI, but how AI is helping us and then what we are able to do with that time saving. AI helps me with social media posting so that I can then spend more time helping patrons, reading book reviews, making selections, or creating more content for social media or whatever it may be. All the different things that we do in libraries. I mean, even just shelving books and picking up and organizing things. I mean, just even the most basic things, it's like those things all stack up in our day. Becoming a guru, develop your skill set. And I think you all are going to be well on your way to doing that. And this could be anything from using it to write reports, to doing research related to your work, summarizing things. It's whatever your tool set is, how AI can help you. Be able to advocate for your work beyond AI. Again, same sort of thing. Keep up with the news and serve as a resource for your library and community on AI. So that's really your charge from me, is to help with the or not contribute to the misinformation and disinformation. We want to continue to be seen as credible institutions that provide credible information. So that is going to be a key part of us using AI, but we also don't want to be seen as not moving forward really to this new AI world, because it is going to impact all of us. We've already talked through all of these best practices about not putting intellectual property into AI or confidential information, that kind of stuff. AI is here to stay. It's experimental, but we should still be using it. And our work does need to shift to include AI as another tool in our toolbox. And on that note, thank you so much for staying a few minutes late with me. And if you have any final questions or thoughts, I'm going to look through the chat and see if I missed any thoughts. Oh, this is an interesting one. Thank you for sharing this. So plugging in demographic data into ChatGPT, copy and pasting from the reports on the internet and asking it to summarize it into a paragraph that is suitable for a board report. Now, isn't that a useful information? Because, data is, as much as I love data, what we need to be able to do with most of the data we have. Now, certainly there's data that describes the resources we have. That's kind of a different bucket of data. But a lot of times what we're doing with data is we're trying to show why something is important or how something is being used. So how many times is this resource being used? What group is using this resource? Is it worth the money that's being spent for this? Are we targeting outreach and it's successful? And I think all of that, being able to use the data to, use AI to tell the story of the data is a really interesting idea. And that has a lot of good potential, I think. And I think we're going to see more of that with the metrics and the analytics as we go along. Facebook does that a little bit with the page metrics. It's a little bit vague in terms of exactly what they're pulling, but they'll kind of tell you like really high level what your demographics are in terms of who's interacting with the page. Yes, the question or the concern about the environmental impacts, yeah. There are some links in some of the resources, and I think that's another piece that we're definitely going to have to talk more about is the resources that are used. And it's not just the resources that are used to do the AI processing, it's also the resources that we're having to have to be able to use AI. A lot of us don't think too much about upgrading to a newer phone, maybe not the newest, latest, greatest, but we know to have a smartphone, but yet for some of our users, especially for some of our community users, a newer smartphone just may not be in the budget, especially these days. And so if everybody else is using AI, then that may even start to create a little bit of a digital divide in that way. And I've thought about that as we've seen more like job applications and things like that move to on loan only, or like the FEMA, which is in the United States, that is the one that distributes and helps a lot with the disaster recovery and sort of dealing with disaster aftermath, but all the applications to get help from FEMA are all online. So if your networks are down, if your systems are down, if your cell phone towers are down, there is typically no way to even contact that governmental agency. So I think we've got a lot of things we're going to have to talk about with artificial intelligence, not only in terms of the resources to actually run these computational processes and these large scale processes, but also then, how does this impact? Well, I mean, we've been talking about misinformation and disinformation, that kind of thing, but then also, how it impacts our users who may not be able to engage with AI. And then also, how can we offer programming that would be able to educate the public in terms of what AI is and how they're encountering it if they do have a smartphone. So I think we've got a lot of work in this area, I see, especially with information literacy efforts and media literacy efforts in terms of helping our users and community members understand how this works and what it means when they encounter information. It's a huge task. It really is. But the best way for us to be able to talk to users about AI is for us to feel comfortable using it, and for us to be able to say, well, I mean, just like in my examples, in this case, it happened to me, and this is what happened. Anytime we can share sort of those real user stories, it helps them connect with something, because it's not just an article or a theory or something. It's like, well, this funny thing, especially if it's kind of funny, this funny thing happened to me, like with the adult book club. It's like that's a great example of sort of some of the guardrails that are getting put onto these. So yes, if there are anyone else that has any more questions or final thoughts. And Jessica, I don't know how you want to wrap up here. I will be sending out the materials shortly. I'm going to run everything through accessibility one more time.
My audio set up here. Robin, that was phenomenal. So it might have seemed like I was making a lot of comments in the chat, but there's actually 4 of us sitting in the room here, learning a lot, having some really great conversations.
Awesome. I love that. No, I honestly, I will just say that if I get to come back and have another session with you all, I love when you all do chat or raise your hand or whatever, because otherwise, like, I can talk about this all day. I really can, because I just am so, and I know you and Jessica, we had such great conversations, just the two of us, but I can talk about this all day. But this is how we learn and how we think about things. And the more we can share and kind of help each other, I mean, that idea of like, using data then to build that story, to be able to give information to your library board. I mean, that's a brilliant idea. I am totally keeping that one as when the next time I need to write a report for something, because I am often myself taking data and I am the one writing the data story. It's me. And I would love now to see what AI will do next time I have to do that. So that's brilliant. Love it. Love it.
Those of you who use our data kind of aggregator Simply Reports to look at collection stuff, I have cut and paste Simply Reports data into ChatGPT and say, tell me about it. And it's
Yeah.
that too. So anyway, Robin, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to our managers and directors across the region for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. We hope that you found this session valuable. And we do have another learning opportunity planned for us in May. I don't have the date right here, but I've sent you quite a few emails, so I'm sure it's in an email somewhere. That content hasn't been determined yet. We do want to work with the PLC group to determine the content of our next session. So please get in touch with me if you have some specific ideas. So again, Robin, thank you so much for your time today. It's great to reach across the border to our colleagues in the United States and, learn from you and learn from each other. So
yep.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.